you don many hats. You are a professor, you are a researcher, you are founder of one of the best institution in India related to DNA research, right? So,
I'm not founder of that, but I was the director of that.
yes, yes, yes. So yeah, you wear many hats. You are contributing a lot to the top journals related to DNA, especially South Asian studies, right? So let's start
Yes.
with the basic. So what is a DNA, and why it is so important to find out uh, human history, human roots?
Yeah, DNA is a genetic material which carries, of course, only it's made up of 4 nucleotides with the different combinations. That's what makes every individual unique, right? And it is passed on generation after the generation. That's why we bring all the characteristic features of our parents, right? Then pass it on to the next generation. So using DNA, DNA is responsible for everything. The mutation in a DNA, particularly in a gene, might cause disease depending upon where exactly it is present. We have 3 billion base pairs and consisting of about 25,000 to 30,000 genes. And of course, that is only 1.5 to 2% of the entire genome which we have. So rest are all called as non-coding region. Of course, it has its own function. Any change in the DNA might lead to various problems. For example, mutation in particular gene, which is responsible for various characteristic feature that would affect only that. For example, some mutation in genes called myosin binding protein C3 or any other genes in the myosin heavy chain or myosin light chain might lead to cardiac disease. There are genes responsible for particular function. So if there's a mutation in that gene, it will affect that function. Ultimately, it will lead to disease.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So that's one. And using DNA, one can also trace our ancestry, right? Because DNA sequence is unique to every single individual. Certain proportion of the DNA we can analyze and identify the individual, so it is useful for forensic applications. So these are the broadly 3 aspects which I told. Also, DNA mutation responsible for making individuals susceptible for some infectious disease. Some mutation might give resistance against some of the infection. Some mutation in a gene which are metabolizing a drug which we consume, that might lead to sometimes adverse effect rather than treating the individual.
Yes.
Sometimes that makes the individual take more dose or less dose. So everything ultimately one has to point down to DNA. So
Yes.
that's why it's very important.
Okay, okay. So that's the basic structure of our human body, right? DNA. So starting from that, I want to talk about your 2009 paper, a very influential paper that was published in 2009 in Nature, right? So with your co-authors. So what was the motivation behind this paper that was published in 2009?
So our research interest has been to understand Indian population history, because in India there are large number of population groups, nearly 4,600 anthropologically well-defined groups are present in Indian subcontinent. There is no other country in the world have such a huge diversity. And we can actually classify them into many ways. One other way of classification is based on the language. That's a broader classification. There are 4 major linguistic groups: Dravidians, Indo-Europeans, Austroasiatic, and Tibeto-Burman. Again, under each linguistic group, there are several languages. For example, if you take Dravidian language, you have Tamil, Malayalam, Kannada, and Telugu. Similarly, if you take Indo-European, there are several languages. Austroasiatic, several languages. Tibeto-Burman, several languages. In addition to that, there are some isolated languages. Like Andamanis, they speak their own language. People speak Nihalis, that's another isolated language. So that's one way of classification. So another classification, as you know, based on the social structure. Like we have so-called upper caste, middle caste, lower caste, tribes, primitive tribes, and so on. Then there's a religious groups. So all this makes more complex in terms of understanding the population history. And most importantly, every single population marry within the group.
Yes.
So that makes even more complex because every single population is very unique in terms of genetics.
Yes.
Right. So our idea, because we have been, I joined CCMB in 1993. So I've been working on population genetics at various level. So, so that paper, earlier we have done a lot of work in that paper. For the first time, we used 1 million genetic markers throughout the genome. That was the first time. In fact, Dr. David Rich from Harvard Medical School, he was really interested in collaborating with us and understanding the Indian population history. So we have done to understand population history, and we found that in the prehistoric India, there were 2 founding populations. One is ancestral South Indians, which probably part of the early human migration. So the Andamanis, the first modern human who migrated out of Africa, which we published in 2005.
Yes.
In fact, that was a paper David has seen and is more interested in collaborating with us. So that's no background of
that paper.
Yeah.
Yes. So if I remember correctly, that paper, you found that mainland Indians, people who are living on mainland, they can be divided into 2 groups, basically, ANI and ASI, right? So what can you tell me more about that?
So this is kind of hypothetical population. As I mentioned, that there are 4,600 plus populations and several linguists, several religious groups, and social groups, linguistic groups. When we analyze that using 1 million genetic markers, so all the Indian populations are clustering one after the other in a kind of gradient of way. Whereas when we included African, European, and Chinese HapMap samples, they were in different clusters.
Yes.
In a single cluster. Each one of them are in a single cluster, whereas Indian population, they are not in a single cluster, but they are in a gradient of cluster. Looks like each population is very unique, like one after the other in a kind of garland. You put bunch of flowers, or like that. So, so that tells that India is not inhabited by a single large population, whereas we can say that India is inhabited by a large number of small population groups.
Okay, so it is basically Indian population is nothing but a cluster of many groups. You can say that.
In fact, a mixture of many groups in the prehistoric India, as I said, 2 founding populations, and they have admixed at some point of time. Then we estimated later that admixture took place for the last 2,000 to 4,000 years.
Okay.
There was admixture.
So may I ask, what is founding population?
So founding in the sense they are the first time to come and settle in India. So when the Andamanis were migrating from Africa, taking southern coastal route, Maybe some group stayed back in India, particularly in South India, either Kerala or in Tamil Nadu. And they are the founding population.
Okay, okay. So since you spoke about David Rich, right? So I have his book and everything. I will link. I will basically attach the link to that book. It is very interesting read, and there is one incident that happened in October 2008. So David Rich basically wrote this book very dramatically. That particular portion of the book. So he talked about. Your colleague, Mr. Singh, David Rich, you are having this conversation and debate about what are the findings of this study and how to represent those findings. Can you tell me more about that incident? David is not going to be happy because I'm talking about his book, but yeah, could you please
Yeah,
tell
so
me?
I think really different opinion from both of our side, because we had very thorough discussion on the data, because that's the first time we have analyzed the large number of population groups representing each linguistic group, representing each of the social groups, and all the populations are obtained throughout India, including Andamanis and so on. So we openly discussed about the findings, and we gave input, and he gave his input, and finally, so that's how the paper came in Nature with the cover image. So scientifically, everything's correct. So nothing
Yes,
of
yes.
opinion in that sense.
I see. I see. So in that particular paper and subsequent studies as well, you and your co-authors also talk about origin of specific social structure in India, the endogamy and caste system. So how did you pinpoint what was the exact timing of the caste system, strengthening of the caste system in India?
But we didn't talk about purely about the caste system and its origin. With the background of the endogamy, so we found approximately last 2 to 4,000 years there was an admixture, and there was the last 2,000 years people are following endogamy, means marrying within the group.
Yes.
And we just took some clue from other studies when the caste system must have introduced. We know that around 1,000 or 1,500 years back must have introduced. To understand why this endogamy has been strictly followed, we thought that probably the caste system must have put more pressure on every single population to maintain the endogamy. So that was the idea. So we didn't actually know precisely when the caste system was introduced. So because we are not either historian or linguist or any other social scientist to know
Okay.
more about the caste system.
Okay, but we know for sure that around 2000 years ago, the strict endogamy started in India, right?
Correct.
So I think that was fascinating. But more importantly, the consequences of your study on today's healthcare, for example. So can you talk more about that? What are the
Yeah, absolutely.
consequences?
Because that's very, very important. So whatever we study, that should have some social impact. In fact, we in 2017 paper again we took large number of population group, including other South Asian countries, and we found that most of the Indian population or South Asians are expected to have population specific recessive disease. That is even more than what has been found in Ashkenazi Jewish and Finnish population, because they
Yes.
are well known for population specific disease. There are 20, 25 disease has been mapped. Most of them are recessive disease. So recessive in the sense that we have 46 chromosomes, 23 we inherit from father, 23 from the mother. As we
Yes.
take one pair of the chromosomes, um, so one comes from father, one from the mother. If one of the chromosome has a mutation, doesn't show any phenotypic effect, so that's a recessive. But if it shows that single mutation, if it shows any phenotypic effect or disease, so that's a dominant in simple way. So most of the population, since they are practicing endogamy, the recessive mutation which might have arose,
Yes.
um, that is going to transmit to the next generation. As long as it goes in a heterozygous condition, I mean, one of the pairs carry the mutation, is not going to cause any disease. And since the populations are marrying within the group, and you would
Yes.
expect that the frequency of the mutation is going to increase in the population.
Yes.
And if it happens for several generations, and because the people are marrying within the community, and there's a chance that the boy and girl who carry the mutation in heterozygous condition, if they marry, again there's a chance that they contribute both abnormal chromosome, one from the father, one from the mother. The child will carry mutation on both the chromosomes. Therefore, there's a disease. So we predicted that at least one third of the Indian populations are expected to have such condition. And in
Yes.
fact, we went back to some other population. We found that uh, it's, it's a rare in general, but if you go to the particular population, the frequency is very, very high. So that's why we predicted that population-specific rare disease are going to be very high. So we are now finding some of the populations are carrying a population-specific recessive disease. We are also making attempt to screen the entire population and give them counseling. Therefore, they can avoid such disease in the future generation.
Yes. So isn't it easier just to stop or dilute the endogamy, and these problems will go away naturally rather than I think that's one of the solutions, right? And you talked about all these issues in the press as well, that hey, look, 2000 years ago you were just kins and cousins, don't fight with each other and etc.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because this practice is more in South India, and probably hundreds of thousands of years back, they must have felt that is essential to have some linkage within the family, or just keep the properties within the family or something like that.
Yes.
But without knowing that it's going to cause such kind of consequences. That's what has been practiced. But now, when we publish the results, people understand now because they're in a position to understand, and now we can see there's a reduction in at least consanguinity. People are trying to avoid close relative marriage, particularly uncle or cousins marriage, first cousin marriage. But I'm sure that slowly, because India follow a very strict societal uh, kind of um, practices, or
Structure you can say.
yeah, structure, and they think that they should not outthink and they should go with the society, all of those. So it will take time to change the mindset of the people, and I'm sure that it will happen in the future, because we have seen the transition in many ways, right?
Yes.
People accepting the modern technology, right? And I'm sure that once they understand the impact of the endogamy, they slowly will change.
Yes. Yes. So you worked with Indian scholars, researchers, as well as foreign scholars. Like you worked with Nobel laureate Swante Pabo. You worked with David Rich. So, what was the difference you found in terms of research facilities in India versus research facilities abroad?
Uh, in the recent past, in terms of facilities, um, India has almost similar facilities. When we collaborate because the experts from different discipline join hand together, so that we can make a very big impact. So that was the idea. So we are expertise in some aspect. Similarly, David, of course, he is expert in different aspects in terms of analysis, in terms of collaboration worldwide, and he has done a large number of such studies, including ancient DNA studies. So that is expert. Similarly, Fabo has his own expert because the first person, along with David and many others, and started the ancient DNA work in big way, and he made a breakthrough research by analyzing Neanderthal genome and gave a good connection between human and our non-human primate and so on. For the researcher or maybe any other field, so collaboration is very, very important. So that the younger generation colleagues should understand, and so that can make a big difference, because a single laboratory acquiring expert in different aspects try to achieve some goal, it might take years together. By the time somebody else in collaborative way, they can complete that research and get better conclusions.
Yes, yes. That is always better, right? Collaborations are always great.
Absolutely, yes.
And one thing I notice in a contrast with India in US is uh, here scholars and researchers are celebrated. For example, when COVID-19 hit in March 2020, uh, Dr. Fauci was celebrated. He was on one end he was celebrated as a celebrity, as a superstar. At the same time, he was like attacked by some groups, right? So I don't see those kind of superstar scientist in India. So why do you think that is the case? Why don't we have superstars that are scientists? The reason I asked that
Because
question is,
when
please
you
go
do
ahead.
COVID, you are well aware that India did much, much better uh, during COVID time. The government, prime minister, scientists, industrialists, particularly um, the, those who have developed vaccines, they all have worked together and have wonderful vaccines and many more things which helped in overcome some of the COVID, either in terms of vaccine or in terms of other facilities are much better. But I don't know, because that's a social structure, or or maybe as we said, not been celebrated. But that's not in our hand. So
Yeah, we can only do our paper writing things, research and publications, right? Yeah, but I think we need to work on that. We need to give more importance to our like scientists and their work. For example, your paper in 2019 and subsequent paper in Science, these are like very important in terms of our public health. But I didn't see a much more coverage of those two papers or subsequent studies in like newspapers or television. Only when I read the book and everything, then I realized that, oh, this is very important. This work is critical for Indian society. But
no, no,
yes,
it's not really true. In fact, so whenever we publish, we also call for press meet when we have bigger paper, particularly for paper which you are referring. That has been well covered in the newspaper, magazines, and even some other television, including BBC. So they had a big cover, and also Times magazine, New York Times. They all cover this work. So
I
that
see.
always happens, and we also make sure that public get to know more about that.
I see. I see. So, since we are already talking about research and everything, I would like to talk more about you. So, I saw your profile, right? And so, when you were like in like college or when you were doing your masters and PhD, lot many people were like they wanted to come to US and join the IT or computer industry, right? But and especially from South India, right? And but you didn't join that race, and you said you're basically making in India product. You studied in India. You basically your entire career is in India, right? So why did you choose sciences rather than technology?
So I like science. In fact, during my childhood and schooling, particularly I like physics, because we know that something we could do. I myself make small things and at home. But when I grew, then I interested in biology, particularly genetics. So that's how I chosen my MPhil and PhD in genetics. Because genetics also is very interesting, because I grew in the village, and in a family where my parents used to do farming. So we see, because of the availability of like the livestock and plant, so everything has some genetic basis, like selection of seed and also selection of bull and other things. We have seen that. So that also maybe probably influence me to take genetics as a main major research. So when you talk about, I stayed back in India because yes, I know that most of my seniors, so they used to go to US as soon as they complete their PhD. But for me also, I did not have any plan to stay back, but I didn't also did not think about going abroad, because I have to complete my PhD, then think about it. And I must say and thank my PhD supervisor, Professor Gopinath, who in fact saw the advertisement of scientist position in CCMB. He asked me to apply for the job, but of course, without so full enthusiasm. So because he said and he gave me the advertisement, so I applied, and then I got the job. And I because that was all happened very within I think 3-4 months. I did not even complete my PhD, and of course, I took some 5-month permission to join CCMB. By the time I completed my research work, all my laboratory work, then I joined, started writing thesis, then submitted my thesis. When I joined CCMB, because when I saw CCMB, I was coming from university where there is a limited number of facilities. When I joined CCMB, because of the availability of all the equipments, facilities, and the culture of CCMB, that was very amazing. Because no lab at those days having such kind of facilities and the cultures. So then that got stuck to me that okay, so that can be a lot more can be explored by staying in India itself, if you are focusing and putting more hard work, because that's main strength. So I believe that I achieved something by staying here. Of course, I had a lot of visit abroad later on. Most of them are either for collaboration or for the conference, delivering talk, and so on.
I see. I see. And what was the motivation behind founding this institute, CDFD, and you are director of that institute right now, right?
So in
CDFD.
fact, that was not now I superannuated a few months back. In fact, that also emerged from CCMB. So my mentor earlier, Dr. Lalji Singh, he was working on some snake called banded kite, and it has a kind of repetitive motive, which has GATA. When Professor Alex Jeffrey, he used his probe, and he found that that can identify every individual, because every individual can generate very unique banding pattern, right? That's because of the probe consisting of repetitive sequence. So the Pelagian also then tried his own probe called GATA, which consists of GATA. Also gave individual specific profile. So then he used for various forensic application, paternity tests, and so on at the time in CCMB. Then the number of cases coming to CCMB for either paternity test or forensic applications are increasing. At that time, we decided, that was the time I also joined CCMB. So he decided that there should be a separate institute for doing this. Even forensic laboratories are not well aware of that those days. So that's how the thought process came by him, that there should be a separate institute for DNA fingerprinting, and the diagnostic is also added later on. For that later stage, I was involved in to making some of the documents and the logo. All those things have done by me. Of course, I never imagined that one day I'll become director of that institute. So that's how that institute was started, and it also trained a large number of forensic laboratories. Now, almost every state forensic laboratory have their own DNA fingerprinting lab. So that's one of the, again, societally very important institute.
Yeah, and not a lot of people know about the origin of that institute. I think that is like one and only institute in India of that kind, right?
I think you can say that nowhere in the world has a dedicated institute for DNA fingerprinting.
I see, I see. So you said you're super animated right now. You're almost done with your career. So are you taking break, or you're still going hard at your
No,
work?
I'm not taking break. I am back to CCMB
Okay.
and continuing my research. I have JC Bose Fellowship, so that gives fellowship, including some small grant for continuing research. So I'm doing. So I'm enjoying doing research.
So you don't plan to stop. Yeah. So, but yeah, it is very interesting to talk about all these things. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure talking to you. Thank you. And